Good morning and welcome to Blain's Morning Porridge, February 17th, 2026. This morning, let's talk about Munich, AI, and the year of the fire horse. But let's start with a quote, as we always do. We must build our hard power, for that is the currency of the age. The future will be set not just by the defence and deterrence discussions last weekend in Munich, but by how global markets react to competition. New Chinese AI drops from DeepSeek and Qwen may challenge US hyperscalers and challenge expectations of global demand and markets. Anyway, Happy New Year to all my readers of the Morning Porridge. Today is the start of the year of the fire horse, so good luck and good fortune to us all. Because history tells us that things can get fruity in fire horse years, which occur every 60 years on the Chinese Zodiac. And that's a significant measure of time. A single 60-year Kondratieff long-term economic cycle encompasses both the incredible economic change, technical evolution and growth we've seen since the 1960s, and the wealth creation that went with that. Periods of hegemonic challenge, however, which raise substantial conflict risks, typically occur every 100 to 120 years. It's called the 2K cycle, which is pretty much where the timeline also is today, as the US and China butt against each other. Now, China has become the most significant challenge to the USA's era as the undisputed global hegemon and economic superpower. And that's happening at a time of increased political instability as Western economies struggle with inequalities and the rise of populism, including the challenges of Donald Trump's second presidency, but also the consequences of underinvestment in deterrence since the end of the Cold War. And that comes at a time of acute social change and external challenges, things like climate change, another pandemic, migration, etc. And that's all happening at a time when competition in global markets has never been so taut. Hegemonic change doesn't have to happen in terms of war and conflict, but it also occurs when previously dominant powers see their economic position challenged and their industrial business base surpassed. Tired economies define most end-of-empire scenarios and explain pretty much why Great Britain gradually faded away after the First World War. And if you put all these random thoughts together, political ineffectiveness and polarization, rising social grievances and tensions around jobs, housing and inequality, things like income, opportunity and justice, and the dramatic competitive technology and economic shifts, which may increase social division by dispensing with jobs completely that are occurring in today's economy, then sprinkle the risks of war on top of all that, and you can see why it's not a particularly pretty world that we live in. Of course, it hasn't helped that Donald Trump's vision for America has necessarily called for a reduction in the costs of its global responsibilities, hence the bust-up with Europe. It could have been done better and without the angst. But what's done is done. The participants at the Munich Security Conference in Munich over the weekend danced around the multiple truths about the widening rifts in the transatlantic economy. The Americans got the message about their wrecking ball that they've swung over the alliance, while Europe clearly understands the world is utterly changed. I'm told it was fascinating and frustrating in equal measure, but decorum was preserved, unlike last year when J.D. Vance insulted the whole of Europe. While everyone was thinking it, nobody screamed Greenland loudly enough to trigger a punch-up. Ukraine does remain an unresolved problem, and the sense of betrayal is acute. But the consensus that I'm hearing from the weekend is the conference moved little forwards. The damage has already been done. Now it's about damage limitation, containing the consequences, and how both the USA and Europe move on. Now, some nations go with Mark Carney's full-on rupture between J-Cake, that's the name I've given to Japan, Canada, Australasia, Korea, and Europe, the middle economies as Mark Carney defined them. Others, including Sir Keir Starmer, tried to find middle ground, hoping to preserve the transatlantic economy and NATO till such a time as Trump is followed by more amenable voices. And I'm told the multiple Democrats who turned up in Munich failed to much impress the Europeans who were there. It's clear that Democratic candidates for the next election came to burnish their images as for the domestic audience as global statespersons who can be trusted to restore America's reputation and place in the world by repairing the global alliances Trump has risen. But the thing was, they were all talking to an American audience rather than addressing Europe's very real concerns. Bernie Sanders' successor, lefty firebrand Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, failed to read the room and flopped answering tough policy questions on Taiwan. Gavin Newsom was also there for domestic consumption. He talked but didn't build a "this is a person we can work with" vibe with the European leaders who were present. That said, my mole tells me the UK would willingly crawl naked over hot coals to meet Newsom rather than deal with J.D. Vance. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio delivered the same message that J.D. Vance did last year, but more politely, and no one was much surprised when he then showed his true colours as he skittered off to deliver his master's fraternal greetings to Viktor Orban in Hungary, which was interpreted as yet another warning that Trump will continue to interfere for the right in European democracies. Where Europe goes from here is the big question. And see, the great thing about NATO was it had a very simple mission statement, which was enshrined in Article 5. An attack against any NATO member is attack against all. And over the weekend, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called for Europe to skip the rhetoric and treat mutual defence as an obligation, which had European prime ministers and presidents staring at each other and wondering, what does that mean? She dug through the sacred texts of the EU treaty and dusted off Article 42.7, Chapter 10, Paragraph 7, Verse 43 of the preamble to the clause, which purports to be Europe's very own mutual defence clause. The snappily titled Article 42.7 obligates Europe to assist if Europe is attacked. Unless, of course, it's Orban's Hungary that is involved and he doesn't want to, or something like that. As we've always known, Europe will remain irrelevant until it sorts out collective action, over-regulation, and its overriding bureaucracy. European politicians talk much about common goals and common interest, while simultaneously favouring national self-interest to ensure their ongoing electoral prospects. Thus it has been in Europe for millennia. But the global economy is not just about politics and defence. Alliances, diplomacy, and fortunes of nations are closely intertwined with the real economy, and the future is about growth, technology, and markets. And that's where the USA may find itself under increasing pressure. And that's where this gets really interesting, because yesterday it was a US holiday, President's Day, Washington's birthday, and a day after its launch confounded US markets last year, DeepSeek launched its latest and cheapest AI product, and it was followed by Alibaba's latest Qwen AI product later in the day. Now, these might be Chinese AI solutions, but they are good and they work. And we're all very aware of the strength of the US economy, how significant growth and falling inflation expectations, driven on the back of the promise of AI productive gains, are further going to boost corporate products, Well, corporate profits. Well, that's just superb. Who would not want to be invested? There. The current real value of the AI markets is kind of rocky. The massive US hyperscalers from Meta, Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, and all the rest were building AI closed source large language models to control and monetize data, seeking monopoly profits by controlling these models' future revenue streams. And there's an increasing strategic concern about AI power across Europe. If the future is going to be dominated by AI, then reliance on US hyperscalers, who have demonstrated they're willing to use the off button if Trump demands it, is going to be unacceptable. AI increasingly looks like a strategic imperative, almost a strategic good for nations, especially ones that have lost their faith in America, which is not dissimilar to what's happening in Europe over defense. And as the US hyperscalers are going deep into debt to build the AI infrastructure in an already heavily indebted nation, that question gets even more significant. Now, the Chinese may not be much better, but they have gone down a much cheaper, less power intensive, and critically open source AI smaller language model. DeepSeek and Qwen have built products that have proved nearly as good and are significantly cheaper. Now, while there will always be a suspicion about using Chinese AI, the fact that data remains with the clients rather than locked up in a closed work US AI large language model is absolutely critical because, as we all know, the value is in the data. There are comparatively recent lessons on economic competition to learn and apply here. A decade ago, Elon Musk was telling us the future value of Tesla was trillions from the many, many electric vehicles he was going to sell into the happy and welcoming Chinese market. Today, Chinese EVs outsell Tesla around the world. The point is, as the hegemonic battle between the USA and China threatens to turn hot, China has the better hand of cards. They have products that squarely challenge the USA across manufacturing centers and computing. They have access to energy and resources, including rare earths, and critically, they are right next door and have access to markets, including the burgeoning middle classes of Southeast Asia. And if Europe and Middle East want to buy and become part of these markets, then they are very welcome. And they are offering open source solutions to AI, which only now is beginning to happen in the US because people like Meta wanted to continue to monopolize that data. That will no longer be possible. And what we're seeing in Silicon Valley is any new AI is on an open weight, open source basis. The world has changed, and as a result, the winners may not be who we once expected. Anyway, that's enough for this morning, and I do apologise for this being slightly late. When I first recorded it, I forgot to switch on the speakers and the microphone. Anyway, out of time and back to my day job. You can find the Morning Porridge on www.morningporridge.com, and if you sign up, you'll get it delivered fresh to your inbox every morning. Thanks very much for your time, and I'll be back with something else tomorrow.